You stare into the mirror each morning, practicing the same smile, the same reassuring nod, the same predictable responses that everyone expects from you. But behind that reflection lies a stranger, someone whose true thoughts would terrify those who claim to know you best. This is the moment you realize that your greatest weakness isn't your flaws, but your desperate need to be understood, to be seen, to lay your soul bare before people who would use that vulnerability to destroy you. The mask you wear isn't cruelty, it's survival. Every genuine emotion you've ever shared has been catalogued, weaponized, and stored for future use against you. Your authenticity became ammunition in their hands. Your tears became leverage, your dreams became jokes, whispered behind closed doors. And still, you kept giving them more, believing that if you just revealed enough of your true self, they would finally see your worth. But worth isn't determined by how much of yourself you sacrifice on the altar of others' approval. Worth isn't earned through emotional transparency or moral purity. Worth is claimed, not granted. It's seized from the hands of those who would measure your value by how useful you are to their agenda. You've confused being good with being weak, being open with being foolish, being vulnerable with being human. The world doesn't reward your honesty, it punishes it. Every time you've spoken your truth, you've handed your enemies the blueprint to your destruction. Every time you've shown your fears, you've given predators the map to your weakness. Every time you've displayed your hopes, you've painted targets on everything you love. This isn't cynicism speaking, this is reality, whispering truths your optimism has desperately tried to silence. You were taught that authenticity would set you free, but authenticity in a world of predators only sets you up for slaughter. You were told that vulnerability was strength, but vulnerability without boundaries is just bleeding in shark-infested waters. You were convinced that being genuine would attract genuine people. But genuine people are as rare as honest politicians and selfless leaders. The mirror doesn't lie, but you've been lying to the mirror. You've been pretending that the person staring back at you is weak, is broken, is somehow less than those who've learned to hide their true nature behind calculated charm and manufactured warmth. But weakness isn't in having emotions. Weakness is in letting others access those emotions without cost, without reciprocity, without respect. The stranger behind your eyes isn't someone to fear, it's someone to befriend. It's the part of you that sees through the performance, that recognizes the game, that understands that your gentleness has been mistaken for stupidity and your kindness has been confused with desperation. This stranger knows what you're only beginning to suspect, that the version of yourself you've been presenting to the world isn't your authentic self. It's your sacrificial self. You've been running an emotional charity, dispensing comfort, understanding, and support to people who would never invest the same energy in your well-being. But charity isn't sustainable when you're the only one donating. You've been operating at an emotional deficit, giving away pieces of your soul to people who barely acknowledge your humanity, let alone your generosity. Every relationship in your life operates on an unspoken economy. There are givers and there are takers, and you've branded yourself as an unlimited supply of giving. You've made yourself so available, so accommodating, so endlessly understanding that people have begun to see your emotional labor not as a gift, but as an entitlement. They expect your comfort when they're hurting but disappear when you need the same support. They demand your attention when they're lonely but become too busy when you reach out in your moments of despair. This isn't accidentally happening to you, this is a pattern you've actively created by refusing to assign value to your emotional resources. You've taught people that your time has no cost, your empathy has no limit, and your patience has no boundary. And they've learned that lesson perfectly, taking everything you offer while giving nothing in return except the privilege of continuing to serve their needs. The most manipulative people in your life have identified you as an emotional wellspring, and they return to that well again and again, never once considering whether they're draining you dry. They've learned your triggers, the exact words that make you feel guilty for setting boundaries, the precise emotional appeals that make you abandon your own needs to serve theirs. They know that if they present their problems with sufficient drama, you'll drop everything to become their therapist, their cheerleader, their emotional support system. But you're not their friend. You're their unpaid emotional laborer. You're the person they call when they need to feel better about themselves, when they need someone to validate their victim narratives, when they need someone to blame for their problems or praise for their minimal efforts. They've turned you into a service provider, and the only payment you receive is the exhaustion that comes from constantly pouring yourself into vessels that have no bottom. You've confused being needed with being valued, but being needed by someone who doesn't value you is just being used with extra steps. Being indispensable to people who would abandon you the moment you stop serving their interests isn't security, it's slavery. You've become so afraid of being alone that you've accepted being invisible, so terrified of being unloved that you've settled for being exploited. The people who drain you aren't doing it accidentally. They're not unaware of the imbalance. They see your exhaustion, your frustration, your growing resentment, and they make calculated moves to keep you engaged just enough to prevent you from walking away. They throw you just enough crumbs of appreciation to keep you hungry for more, just enough moments of acknowledgement to make you believe that maybe if you try harder, give more, sacrifice deeper, they'll finally reciprocate your investment. But reciprocity from emotional predators isn't delayed, it's non-existent. They don't see relationships as mutual exchanges of care and support. They see them as opportunities to extract resources from those foolish enough to give freely. And you've been advertising yourself as someone who gives freely, someone who asks for nothing in return, someone who measures her worth by how much she can endure without breaking. The economy of emotional labor in your life is rigged against you, and you've been the one rigging it. You've set the exchange rate so low that your pain has no value, your time has no cost, and your needs have no priority. You've created a market where everyone else's emotions are precious commodities, while yours are treated as worthless surplus, freely distributed to anyone who shows up with a sob story and an expectation of comfort. This isn't compassion you've been practicing. This is self-destruction disguised as virtue, and the only person who can adjust the exchange rate is you. Beneath the carefully constructed facade of patience and understanding lies a seething ocean of rage that you've spent years learning to suppress, to rationalize, to transform into more socially acceptable emotions. But rage isn't always destructive. Sometimes it's the only appropriate response to being systematically devalued, consistently overlooked, and perpetually taken for granted. You've been taught that anger is ugly, that fury is unbecoming, that expressing your genuine frustration makes you difficult, unreasonable, or emotionally unstable. So you've learned to swallow your rage, to digest it into guilt, to metabolize it into self-doubt. Every time someone dismissed your feelings, you told yourself you were being too sensitive. Every time someone violated your boundaries, you convinced yourself you hadn't communicated clearly enough. Every time someone took advantage of your generosity, you blamed yourself for not being more careful about who you trusted. But your rage isn't pathological. It's diagnostic. It's your psyche's immune system responding to toxicity. Your inner wisdom recognizing when you're being harmed. Your authentic self protesting the violence being done to your spirit. That fury you feel when someone dismisses your pain. That's not you being dramatic, that's you recognizing that your pain matters. That anger that rises when someone takes credit for your work. That's not you being petty, that's you understanding that your contributions have value. The people who benefit from your emotional labor have a vested interest in keeping you disconnected from your rage. They need you to believe that your anger is the problem, not their exploitation. They need you to think that setting boundaries is selfish, that demanding reciprocity is unreasonable, that expecting basic respect is asking too much. They've convinced you that your rage makes you the villain in stories, where you're actually the victim. Your anger isn't evidence of your failure to be spiritual, enlightened, or emotionally evolved. Your anger is evidence that some part of you still knows you deserve better than what you've been accepting. It's the voice of your self-respect speaking through the only emotion powerful enough to cut through years of conditioning, gaslighting, and manipulation. Your rage is the sound of your authentic self refusing to be silently destroyed. But you've been directing that rage inward, using it as a weapon against yourself instead of recognizing it as information about your circumstances. You've turned your fury into self-attack, convinced that if you just tried harder, gave more, or were somehow better, you wouldn't feel so angry all the time. You've made yourself the enemy in your own life, assuming that your emotional responses are wrong rather than recognizing that your situation is intolerable. The rage you feel isn't random. It has patterns, triggers, and targets. It emerges when your boundaries are violated, when your contributions are minimized, when your needs are ignored, when your voice is silenced. It's your psyche's way of saying that something in your environment is fundamentally incompatible with your well-being. But instead of listening to that message, you've been shooting the messenger. Every time you suppress your legitimate anger, you teach the world that your mistreatment is acceptable. Every time you swallow your rage and smile instead, you signal that you're willing to absorb infinite amounts of disrespect without consequence. Every time you apologize for having emotional reactions to being harmed, you give others permission to continue harming you. Your rage isn't something to overcome, it's something to understand, to respect, to learn from. It's been trying to tell you that you're worth defending, that your boundaries matter, that your peace is more valuable than other people's comfort with your compliance. It's been trying to wake you up from the dream that being endlessly accommodating will somehow transform the people around you into better human beings. The archaeology of your rage reveals layers of accumulated injustice, years of swallowed protests, decades of unacknowledged violations. Each layer tells a story of a moment when you chose peace over self-respect, harmony over authenticity, other people's comfort over your own well-being. And beneath all those layers lies a truth that your rage has been protecting. You are not required to be anyone's emotional dumping ground, unpaid therapist, or unlimited resource. Your anger isn't the enemy of your peace. Your refusal to honor your anger is. You carry invisible chains forged from obligations you never agreed to, expectations you never endorsed, and responsibilities that were never rightfully yours. These chains don't rattle because they're made of guilt, shame, and the persistent belief that your worth is determined by how much suffering you're willing to absorb in service of others. Comfort. The heaviest chain around your neck is the belief that you're responsible for other people's emotional states. You've appointed yourself the designated mood manager for everyone in your orbit, convinced that if someone is upset in your presence, you've somehow failed in your duty to maintain universal happiness. You walk through life monitoring everyone else's emotional weather, adjusting your behavior to ensure optimal conditions for their well-being, while your own inner climate deteriorates from neglect. But you didn't sign up to be anyone's emotional regulator. You weren't born with the job description of perpetual people-pleaser, eternal optimist, or professional problem-solver. These roles were assigned to you by people who benefited from your willingness to shoulder burdens that were never yours to carry. They saw your empathy as exploitable, your compassion as controllable, your kindness as conquerable. Another chain binds you to the exhausting performance of being consistently grateful for less than you deserve. You've been taught to appreciate crumbs as if they were banquets, to celebrate bare minimum effort as if it were extraordinary generosity, to be thankful for being treated with basic human decency as if it were a rare gift. You've trained yourself to lower your expectations so far underground that anything above contempt feels like love. The chain of false responsibility wraps around your chest, making it hard to breathe when you consider the possibility of stepping away from people who drain you. You've convinced yourself that others can't survive without your constant support, that your withdrawal would devastate them, that you're somehow essential to their functionality. But this is narcissism disguised as compassion. The truth is that most people were managing their lives perfectly well before you appointed yourself their savior, and they'll continue managing after you reclaim your energy. You carry the chain of inherited trauma, convinced that because others have suffered, you must suffer too. You've made pain a competitive sport where expressing your struggles feels like minimizing someone else's, where healing feels like betrayal to those still drowning, where peace feels like privilege you haven't earned. But trauma isn't a finite resource that you're stealing from others by healing. Your recovery doesn't diminish anyone else's pain, it just proves that escape is possible. The most insidious chain is forged from the belief that love must be earned through sacrifice. You've confused being needed with being loved, being useful with being valued, being indispensable with being irreplaceable. This chain convinces you that affection is a transaction, where you must constantly pay higher and higher prices for the same basic recognition of your humanity. You've been operating under the delusion that if you just give enough, sacrifice enough, prove your devotion enough, people will finally love you the way you love them. But love that requires constant proof isn't love, it's emotional extortion. Relationships that demand endless sacrifice aren't partnerships, they're hostage situations. People who only value you for what you provide aren't your friends, they're your clients. And you've been working for free. Each invisible chain represents a boundary you've failed to set, a limit you've refused to enforce, a standard you've abandoned in favor of being accepted by people who don't even respect you enough to reciprocate your energy. These chains feel heavy because you've been wearing them for so long that you've forgotten what freedom feels like, what it means to move through the world without constantly calculating how your actions will affect everyone else's comfort. Weight you feel isn't depression, it's the accumulated mass of obligations that were never yours, expectations that were never reasonable, and responsibilities that you inherited not through choice but through conditioning. You've been programmed to believe that your value comes from your capacity to absorb others' problems, that your purpose is to be a shock absorber for everyone else's emotional turbulence. But these chains aren't locked, they're held in place by your belief that you deserve to wear them, that removing them would make you selfish, cold, or somehow less worthy of love. The key to every chain is the recognition that you were never meant to carry weight that isn't yours, that you were never obligated to be everyone's solution, that your worth was never contingent on your willingness to disappear into the service of others' needs. The inventory of your invisible chains reveals not your weakness, but the strength you've been wasting on the wrong battles. Every chain represents energy that could be redirected toward your own growth, goals, and genuine relationships with people who value you for who you are, not what you do for them. You perform in a theater where intimacy is manufactured, vulnerability, while it is weaponized, and authenticity is a carefully crafted illusion designed to extract maximum emotional investment from unsuspecting audiences. Every relationship in your life has become a stage where you've been assigned the role of the eternally supportive character, never the protagonist of your own story. The people closest to you have mastered the art of performing intimacy without actually providing it. They know exactly which words to say to make you feel seen, understood, and valued. But these words are scripts learned from observing your reactions, not genuine expressions of care. They've studied you like a textbook, memorizing your emotional triggers, cataloging your insecurities, and mapping your vulnerabilities, so they can access them whenever they need something from you. This manufactured intimacy feels real because it's designed to feel real. When they remember details about your life, it's not because they care about you, it's because they care about maintaining access to you. When they share their own struggles with you, it's not because they trust you with their vulnerability, because they've learned that shared trauma creates the illusion of deep connection while establishing you as their unpaid emotional support system. You've been confusing intensity with intimacy, drama with depth, and crisis bonding with genuine connection. The people who drain you most aren't those who ignore you. They're those who've learned to simulate caring just convincingly enough to keep you emotionally invested in their well-being while remaining completely unavailable for yours. They create artificial emergencies that require your immediate attention, manufactured crises that demand your emotional labor, and fabricated vulnerabilities that exploit your compassion. The theater operates on a system where your emotional availability is constant while theirs is conditional. They're present when they need something from you, but mysteriously unavailable when you need something from them. They remember your birthday when they want a favor, but forget your achievements when you're celebrating success. They have time to discuss their problems for hours, but become suddenly busy when you try to share your own struggles. But the most tragic part of this performance is that you've become complicit in maintaining the illusion. You've learned to accept breadcrumbs of attention as evidence of deep connection, to interpret sporadic communication as proof of their caring, to convince yourself that their inability to reciprocate your energy is just their unique way of showing love. You've become your own gaslighter, manufacturing excuses for their behavior that they never bothered to create themselves. The script you've been handed in this theater is designed to keep you permanent in the supporting role. You're the friend who listens but is never heard, the confidant who keeps secrets but whose own struggles are dismissed as insignificant, the supporter who celebrates others' victories but whose own achievements are minimized or ignored entirely. You've been cast as the character whose purpose is to make everyone else's story more comfortable, more manageable, more bearable. This performance requires you to shrink your authentic self into a size that doesn't threaten anyone else's narrative. You've learned to minimize your successes so others don't feel inadequate, to downplay your struggles so others don't feel burdened, to modulate your personality so perfectly that you become a mirror reflecting back whatever version of you each person needs to see. But mirrors don't have their own image, they only exist to show others themselves. The intimacy you crave isn't being withheld from you accidentally. It's being strategically managed by people who understand that genuine connection would require them to reciprocate your investment, and reciprocity would interfere with their ability to extract resources from you without giving anything meaningful. In return, they maintain just enough emotional distance to avoid real responsibility for your well-being while staying close enough to access your emotional labor when they need it. You've been mistaking transaction for connection, performance for presence, and emotional labor for love. The people who consume the most of your energy aren't necessarily the people who care about you most. They're often the people who've become most skilled at accessing your caring without having to provide their own. They've learned that you equate being needed with being valued, so they manufacture needs that only you can meet. But real intimacy doesn't require you to disappear into someone else's story. Genuine connection doesn't demand that you sacrifice your own needs to prove your worthiness of love. Authentic relationships don't operate on the assumption that you must constantly audition for the role of being valued. True intimacy is reciprocal, sustainable, and enhancing rather than depleting. The theater of manufactured intimacy has been running for so long that you've forgotten what authentic connection feels like. You've been so busy performing the role of the perfect friend, partner, or family member that you've lost touch with who you actually are when you're not serving someone else's emotional agenda. But underneath all the performance, beneath all the manufactured caring, beyond all the scripted responses lies a person whose authentic presence is more valuable than any role you could perform for people who mistake your desperation to be loved for genuine compatibility. Beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the accumulated expectations, beneath the debris of every relationship that taught you to shrink yourself smaller and smaller, lies an archaeological treasure that most people spend their entire lives never discovering: your authentic power. This isn't the power to control others, to manipulate outcomes, or to force the world to bend to your will. This is the power to remain yourself regardless of who's watching, to maintain your standards regardless of who's protesting, to honor your truth regardless of who finds it inconvenient. Your authentic power has been buried under years of being told that your natural responses were too much, too intense, too inconvenient for others to handle. You learned to excavate your own strength, to bury your instincts, to cover your intuition with layers of doubt and second-guessing. But power that can be buried was never truly lost. It was just waiting for you to remember where you left it. The first layer of excavation reveals your capacity to say no without explanation, without apology, without the exhausting performance of justifying why you won't participate in your own diminishment. This isn't selfishness, this is self-preservation. This isn't cruelty, this is clarity. This isn't being difficult. This is being definitive about what you will and won't accept in your life. Deeper excavation uncovers your ability to disappoint people who have grown comfortable with your compliance. You discover that you can survive other people's anger, withstand their guilt trips, and remain unmoved by their emotional manipulation. You learn that their discomfort with your boundaries says nothing about the validity of those boundaries and everything about their investment in your unlimited availability. As you dig deeper, you find layers of discernment you'd forgotten you possessed. You remember how to distinguish between people who value your presence and people who value your presence, between those who appreciate your mind and those who appreciate your service, between genuine connection and sophisticated exploitation. This discernment isn't judgment, it's recognition of patterns, acknowledgement of evidence, acceptance of what people show you about themselves when they think you're not paying attention. The most profound layer of excavation reveals your capacity to be alone without being lonely, to exist without external validation, to find fulfillment in your own company rather than constantly seeking completion through others' approval. This solitude isn't isolation, it's integration. It's the recognition that you are a complete entity, not half a person desperately searching for another half to feel whole. Your authentic power includes the ability to walk away from situations that require you to betray yourself to maintain them. This isn't abandonment, this is alignment. This isn't giving up, this is growing up. This isn't running away, this is running toward a version of yourself that doesn't need to perform for love, compete for attention, or compromise core values for temporary comfort. As the excavation continues, you uncover your natural ability to attract people who appreciate your authentic self rather than those who only value the performance version of you. These people don't need you to be less than you are to feel comfortable with themselves. They don't require you to shrink your light to prevent them from feeling insecure about their own darkness. They celebrate your growth rather than sabotaging it, support your boundaries rather than testing them, and contribute to your peace rather than constantly disrupting it. Authentic power includes the recognition that you don't owe anyone access to your energy, your time, your emotional resources, or your presence. These are gifts to be given freely to those who demonstrate through consistent actions that they value what you're offering. Your power lies in your ability to revoke access when it becomes clear that your generosity is being exploited rather than appreciated. The deepest layer of excavation reveals your capacity to trust yourself, your instincts, your observations, your gut feelings about people and situations. You remember that your intuition has been trying to protect you from exploitation, manipulation, and energy vampires. But you've been trained to override those protective instincts in favor of giving everyone the benefit of the doubt. Your power includes the wisdom to trust first impressions, honor red flags, and act on warning signals instead of explaining them away. This archaeological process isn't about becoming hard, cold, or disconnected from others. It's about becoming discerning, boundaried, and selective about where you invest your precious life energy. It's about recognizing that your capacity for love, care, and support is a finite resource that should be carefully stewarded rather than indiscriminately distributed to anyone who shows up with a need. Your authentic power doesn't make you less loving, it makes you more intentional about how you love. It doesn't make you less generous, it makes you more strategic about your generosity. It doesn't make you less available, it makes you less available to people who don't deserve access to your availability. The person you were before you learned to dim your light, shrink your presence, and minimize your needs is still there, buried but intact. The strength you had before you learned to apologize for taking up space is still there, waiting to be reclaimed. The clarity you possessed before you learned to doubt your own perceptions is still there, ready to guide you back to yourself. Your authentic power is your birthright, not something you need to earn through suffering or prove through sacrifice. It's yours by virtue of being human, not something awarded to you based on how well you serve others. Agendas. You stand at the threshold of a revolutionary understanding. Caring is not a moral obligation to be distributed equally among all who demand it, but a precious resource to be invested wisely in those who demonstrate they deserve it. This isn't callousness, this is consciousness. This isn't selfishness, this is self-preservation. This isn't giving up on humanity, this is growing up about humanity. The world has convinced you that unlimited caring is a virtue, that bound compassion is enlightenment, that saying yes to every emotional demand is evidence of your moral superiority. But unlimited caring isn't sustainable. Boundaryless compassion isn't wise. And saying yes to everyone means saying no to yourself. You've been practicing a form of emotional communism, redistributing your care equally regardless of merit, reciprocity, or basic respect for your humanity. Selective caring is the recognition that your emotional investment should flow toward people who reciprocate rather than simply receive, who contribute to your well-being rather than only consuming from it, who enhance your life rather than merely existing in it. This selectivity isn't based on arbitrary preferences or superficial judgments, it's based on evidence patterns and the fundamental truth that energy given to energy vampires is energy stolen from people. The fundamental truth that energy given to energy vampires is energy stolen from people who would nurture it and return it multiplied. The sovereignty of selective caring means you become the executive director of your own emotional resources, making strategic decisions about where your care will have the greatest impact, where your love will be most appreciated, where your support will be genuinely valued rather than simply expected. You stop operating an emotional charity and start running an emotional investment firm, putting your resources where they'll generate returns in the form of mutual respect, reciprocal support, and genuine appreciation. This doesn't mean you become calculating or transactional in your relationships. It means you become conscious of the energy exchange in every relationship. Aware of whether you're in a mutual partnership or a one-sided service arrangement, you begin to notice the difference between people who care about you and people who care about what you do for them. Between those who value your presence and those who value your presence, selective caring requires the development of emotional discernment, the ability to distinguish between genuine need and manufactured crisis, between authentic vulnerability and emotional manipulation, between temporary struggle and perpetual dysfunction. Not everyone who appears to be drowning is actually drowning, and not everyone who appears to need saving actually wants to be saved. Some people have learned that claiming victim status grants them access to your resources without requiring them to take responsibility for their own well-being. The practice of sovereign caring means you stop responding to every emotional emergency as if it were equally urgent, equally legitimate, equally deserving of your immediate attention. You develop the wisdom to recognize that some crises are created specifically to hijack your energy, that some emergencies are manufactured to maintain your dependency on being needed, that some problems persist because solving them would eliminate the drama that keeps you engaged. You learn that caring doesn't always require action, that love doesn't always require rescue, that compassion doesn't always require sacrifice. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do is allow people to experience the natural consequences of their choices without cushioning them from the lessons those consequences were designed to teach. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's dysfunction by constantly providing solutions they refuse to implement. Selective caring also means caring more deeply for fewer people rather than caring shallowly for everyone. Instead of spreading your emotional resources thin across dozens of relationships that drain you, you concentrate your care on the relationships that sustain you, nurture you, and grow you. You become like a master gardener who tends to a smaller garden with greater attention rather than trying to water every plant in the forest. This selectivity extends to how you care for yourself. You stop treating self-care as a luxury to be enjoyed only after everyone else's needs are met, and start recognizing it as a fundamental requirement for having anything valuable to offer others. You understand that caring for yourself isn't selfish, it's strategic. A depleted person has nothing to give except exhaustion, resentment, and diminishing returns. The sovereignty of selective caring means you stop apologizing for having standards about how you want to be treated. Stop feeling guilty for expecting reciprocity in relationships. Stop justifying your decision to invest in people who invest in you rather than people who only withdraw from you. You recognize that standards aren't barriers to love. They're filters that ensure your love reaches people capable of appreciating and reciprocating it. You develop the courage to care less about people who care less about you, to invest less in people who invest less in you, to be less available to people who are less available to you. This isn't revenge, this is balance. This isn't punishment, this is proportional response. This isn't being mean, this is being mathematical about emotional economics. The most profound aspect of selective caring is learning to care deeply about your own peace, your own growth, your own dreams, with the same intensity you once reserved for others' problems, others' goals, others' emotional stability. You begin to treat your own well-being as seriously as you treated everyone else's, to protect your own energy as carefully as you protected everyone else's comfort, to prioritize your own healing as urgently as you prioritized everyone else's happiness. Selective caring doesn't make you less compassionate, it makes your compassion more powerful because it's focused, intentional, and sustainable. It doesn't make you less loving, it makes your love more valuable because it's no longer free, unlimited, and taken for granted. It doesn't make you less available, it makes your availability a privilege rather than an assumption. The sovereignty of selective caring is the recognition that you are not the universe's designated emotional first responder, that you are not required to rescue every drowning person you encounter, that you are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Your care is precious precisely because it comes from a finite human being, not an infinite resource. And precious things should be treated with the reverence they deserve. The final realization arrives, not as a dramatic revelation but as a quiet knowing. You must build an inner fortress not to keep everyone out, but to ensure that only those worthy of your inner sanctuary are granted access. This fortress isn't built from walls of hatred or towers of cynicism, it's constructed from boundaries forged in wisdom, gates secured by discernment, and bridges extended only to those who've proven they won't burn them for temporary warmth. The foundation of your inner fortress is self-knowledge, the unshakable understanding of who you are when no one is watching, what you value when no one is approving, what you need when no one is providing. This foundation cannot be built on others' opinions of you, others' validation of you, or others' definitions of your worth. It must be poured from your own concrete understanding of your inherent value, your authentic desires, your non-negotiable standards for how you will and won't be treated. The walls of your fortress are not barriers, they are filters. They allow love to enter while keeping exploitation outside. They welcome genuine connection while deflecting manipulation. They invite authentic relationship while repelling those who approach you as a resource to be consumed rather than a person to be respected. These walls are constructed from every lesson learned through pain, every boundary crossed without permission, Every moment when you chose others' comfort over your own well-being, the gate of your fortress is guarded not by suspicion, but by standards. Not everyone who approaches deserves entry. Not every sob story requires your emotional labor. Not every request for help obligates your assistance. The guard at your gate asks simple but profound questions. Does this person reciprocate the energy they're requesting? Have they demonstrated respect for your boundaries? Do they contribute to your peace or only consume from it? Are they seeking genuine connection or simply convenient support? Within the walls of your fortress lies a space where your authentic self can exist without performance, without apology, without constant adjustment to accommodate others' limitations. This is the space where your real thoughts live without censorship, where your genuine feelings exist without judgment, where your true desires can be acknowledged without shame. This inner sanctum is not shared with everyone who claims to care about you, only with those who've proven they can handle your authenticity without trying to diminish, manipulate, or exploit it. The fortress contains chambers for different purposes. There's a room for solitude where you can process your experiences without external input, without others' interpretations coloring your understanding, without the noise of others' opinions drowning out your inner wisdom. There's a library where you store the lessons learned from every relationship, every disappointment, every moment of clarity about human nature and your own patterns. There's a workshop where you craft responses instead of simply reacting, where you design strategies rather than hoping for the best, where you build tools for maintaining your peace in a world that profits from your chaos. This is where you learn that every interaction is a choice, that you always have options even when others try to convince you that you don't, that your power lies not in controlling others but in controlling your response to others. The fortress includes a treasury where you store your energy, your time, your emotional resources like the precious commodities they are. You've learned to be selective about expenditure, strategic about investment, careful about who has access to your vault. You no longer give away your treasures to anyone who approaches with a compelling story of need. You've learned that your resources are finite and should be allocated to those who demonstrate appreciation, reciprocity, and respect. From the towers of your fortress, you can see clearly the landscape of your relationships. You can identify the energy vampires approaching from miles away, recognize the patterns of manipulation before they reach your gates, distinguish between genuine emergencies and manufactured crises designed to breach your defenses. This elevated perspective allows you to make decisions from a place of clarity rather than emotion, strategy rather than impulse. The fortress is not a prison, it has bridges that extend toward those who've earned access through consistent demonstration of respect, care, and reciprocity. These bridges are not permanent structures but renewable passages that can be rebuilt when relationships prove worthy or withdrawn when they prove destructive. You've learned that access to your inner world is a privilege that must be continually earned, not a right granted once and assumed forever. The most beautiful aspect of your inner fortress is that it becomes more magnificent the more selective you become about who you allow inside. When your inner space is no longer cluttered with the drama of people who drain you, when your emotional energy is no longer scattered across a dozen one-sided relationships, when your peace is no longer constantly disrupted by others' manufactured crises, you discover that you have room for relationships of extraordinary depth, beauty, and mutual enrichment.